we are going to be flipping over now to join Amanda Vowles. Amanda is here with us. Here we go. Hey,
Hello.
Amanda, how you doing?
Great. How are you?
Good. Let's see. You're out Midwest, right?
I am. It's actually beautiful weather here. We're in the 70s in November in Ohio. This is crazy.
Unheard of, right?
It is.
Well, I hope that you've been able to listen in on some of the discussions thus far, because it has been a really, really engaging day. We've got a great audience, a lot of interaction, and the after parties have been great too. So Amanda is joining us from Goodyear Tire and Rubber. She is the director of global talent and organization capability at Goodyear Tire and Rubber. As Gary alluded to just a few minutes ago, Amanda is responsible for overseeing learning and development, leadership training throughout the globe. So it's not just a US thing. Anything you want to add to that, Amanda, about what you do and what you've been doing during COVID?
Well, I would say you summarized it very nicely. I like to think, a lot of people say, what is it that you actually do? And I like to simplify it and say, I get to help companies unleash their competitive advantage through their people. So
cool.
That's my elevator speech.
That's awesome. I like that. That's awesome. Well, you said it much better than I did. So we're going to turn things over to you now. And let's see, I apologize. I believe you're sharing your screen, or are we running it for you?
I am going to share my screen right now. So let's just make sure that comes up okay for you guys. Can you see everything?
We can see it. You take it away and we'll see you in a few minutes.
Well, perfect. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much, and thank you for the warm welcome, and thank you to all of you who are joining for the session today. It's quite an honor to be with you. Really a pleasure to be a part of this first ever virtual global e-learning conference. And what an incredible lineup of speakers and sessions. I certainly hope that many of you have had an opportunity to sit in on some of those, as Susan just mentioned. I, in fact, just heard Gary talking about the session later today, lessons from a cyber criminal, and I'm thinking that I want my children, my teenagers in particular, to join in for that one later today. So what a great lineup, and so happy to be a part of today. I have to tell you, when the global e-learning team approached me about this topic of why 2021 requires new leadership skills, I was instantly intrigued and excited. It really, I think in many ways, was a moment of pause that I personally needed to really step back and think about everything that's happened this year. Naturally, as I started to reflect, I wanted to understand everything. What have we learned? What can we learn? What could we start doing differently? And I'm sure that some of you are suspiciously sitting there as a part of this conference wondering, did she really think about those things? Well, I am a talent learning and org development professional, so of course I did. That's where my interest goes instantly. So today I want to take you on a little journey, sharing some reflections about 2020, including what we can learn, what we have learned, and really the implication this has on how we're going to lead going forward, what this looks like in 2021. Now, sure, some of what I'm going to share is based on my personal observations, but much of what I'm going to share is really what I'm hearing from other leaders and professionals across the industries as well. So if I start here with just kind of the reality of 2020, what in the world has happened this year? The reality is that we're experiencing a global pandemic, one like no other, and one that none of us are immune to. And regardless of where you're joining from today, I suspect that personally or professionally, to some extent, to some degree, you've been impacted by this global pandemic. And honestly, a few months ago, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, some of us may have just imagined what thriving would be in order to just get to a better normal after COVID-19. Yet this year has been further compounded by concurrent challenges of racial injustices, particularly in the US. We've faced challenges with climate change and many economic uncertainties. So getting to this place, I think, where we just want to thrive, we want to get beyond COVID-19, appears to be a bit more arduous and maybe even lengthier than some of us had even imagined or hoped for. In fact, I was preparing for today and I was doing a little bit of research, and Deloitte just recently published a study saying that as many as 76% of companies and geographies are still in a respond and recover phase of the crisis. So it really does seem that for many of us, that getting to this better normal just cannot come fast enough. So to get started, I really want to hear from you and understand what your experience has been like in 2020 so far. So Grace is going to launch a poll, and I'd like for you to select the answer that best describes your experience. The question is, what is the extent of change you have experienced related to how you work, where you work, and/or your general routines over the last 8 months? So just pick the response that best describes your experience, and we'll take a look and see what we've got rolling in here. Well, I have to say, I'm not surprised here. 86% of you are saying that you are seeing significant change impacting one or more aspects of your work or your personal routines. It's interesting, I used the same question just recently with a group of associates, and I had almost exact or identical response. And again, I can't say that I'm surprised by that, but I think in many cases, we've tried to adapt or maybe even pretend, trick ourselves into believing that it really hasn't been as involved of change as it really has been. But the truth is here, just hearing from you guys and the amount and the significant amount of change that's occurring for each of you. So thank you for responding to that. I appreciate it. It's really helpful to kind of understand where each of you are coming from and what you're approaching the webinar here today with. Okay. So I suspect that for some of us, considering the extent or the amount of change that we've experienced, I imagine that for some of us, some of these changes have been pretty significant and challenging. And I really suppose that maybe the silver lining, at least for me to think about, is that we really have learned so much. And I think there's only more that we can learn. We're pretty resilient as human beings, and I find that we bounce back. We learn how to navigate very challenging and complex situations, and this is very similar. So we are learning, and there's a lot of things that we can glean from this in terms of how to be successful going forward, specifically from a leadership perspective in 2021. So I want to start with some of the things that I've observed from the learnings. I think first and foremost, one thing that I take away is that we're all impacted differently. While most of us are reporting significant changes, what those changes look like and feel like are very different for each of us. It's almost unique to the person. I was recently talking with a leader, and he shared a story with me. A couple of months ago, he had joined a Zoom call to connect with some former college friends from many years ago. And so this is probably one thing that is becoming the new norm. I know a lot of friends and families are joining for these more frequent Zoom connections since we can't get together physically. And so this leader was sharing that story, jumped on a Zoom call with several of his former college mates. And as they're talking, one of his old college mates is talking about all these new shows on Netflix and all the things that he's been able to do and catch up on as a part of the lockdown. Can't go out and do anything. So, wow, I've been watching all these shows. And so he asked this leader that I work with, what have you been watching? What have you caught up with? And the leader, friend of mine, said, my jaw almost dropped. And I said, I don't have time for that. I've been working. I'm working long hours. I'm working, it feels like 24/7. I'm working from home, and the morning runs into the night, and the night runs back into the morning. So it's a good example of how this change and these changes have shown up differently for each of us. So we're all impacted a little bit differently. The second thing that I've learned is that we can adapt. In fact, businesses can adapt as well, and we have to continue to do so. I said it before, we are resilient as human beings. That's what sets us apart. That's what makes us different. And we can make changes. We've shown that to not only the world, our organizations that we work with, but we've proven it to ourselves. For me, for example, I went from working in an office for my entire career, saying I'd never want to work remotely, I wouldn't want to work from home, to now I'm working from home on the regular. It's been a change, one that I wouldn't have necessarily pursued on my own, but with a little nudge of COVID-19, I have made that change and I've adapted. And I suspect that many of you have as well. And the same is true for business. I have some family that work for some of the large crafting giants in the world. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I saw many of those organizations do, and do very quickly, was pivot. They pivoted their selling techniques to meet people where they were and what they needed in the moment. So mass production of masks, so really bulking up their supply around fabrics and selling masks, sewing masks for clinicians, healthcare organizations. And so they made that change and they made it pretty quickly. I also saw, which I thought was pretty creative, is this shift in the business of some of these crafting giants to say, if we can't get people to come here to buy crafting supplies, let's package up crafting kits and send them to the homes where, in many cases, individuals had young children who were also at home with them. So what a great way to keep them busy. So we've seen the change and we're adapting, we personally as well as businesses. The last thing that I've learned is that leadership matters now, maybe more than ever before. With change comes uncertainty. And if there's one thing that I know that we all have in common, is that to some extent, we crave certainty. So it's kind of the opposite of what this environment has created. And I'll tell you, I have seen HR teams and company leaders spending countless hours over the last several months during lockdowns around the globe, listening to employees, using their insights to form both strategy and tactics to take the organizations forward. And it's working. In fact, there's recent research where employees, over 88% of employees, report feeling that they believe that their leaders care about their health and well-being. That's pretty significant. So leadership definitely matters and is going to be important taking us forward into 2021. So what it boils down to, I think about companies and leaders. We must continue to evolve our operations to meet the challenging expectations while ensuring that we're protecting the health of employees as well as our customers. And for me, what I think about is, when I think about success, it really boils down to a few things that are pretty clear. First and foremost, the company with the strongest talent usually wins the race. And our responsibilities as leaders is to figure out, how do we continue to connect and engage our talent in the safest way possible while continuing to deliver results. That doesn't change. I was talking with a leader just last week, and he described it like this, and it kind of stuck with me. He said, if you want the strongest talent, then we must continue to invest and develop their capabilities, so much so that their resume is so amazing, it's so outstanding, that if they wanted, within just a few minutes of putting themselves out in the market, they could have 5 competitive offers from other organizations almost immediately. But the catch to that is, we don't want the talent to leave. So we have to create such an amazing culture that they wouldn't even consider putting themselves on the market. And if you think about the reality of COVID, in many ways, it has leveled the playing field for how we recruit. More organizations today are exploring remote work options than they were 8 months ago. So we need to build the best talent and keep the best talent. So you're probably asking yourself, how do we do that? How do we find that right balance? And as I talk to leaders and associates across the globe, there were 4 things that I heard pretty consistently as being more important now than ever before. And those boil down to empathy, trust, agility and resilience, and inclusivity. So I'm going to start with empathy and kind of unpacking this here for a minute. Our people, and this includes us as well, we're undergoing unprecedented levels of stress and uncertainty. Workers, in some cases, have suffered deep personal losses from COVID-19. And as I mentioned before, in some cases, racial injustices. Parents are stretching to navigate childcare, and there are major uncertainties over schooling responsibilities while still meeting work commitments. I mean, at the end of the day, we still have to deliver results, right? And so it requires us as leaders to operate with both empathy and courage on our part in order to take an organization and to take our people forward. As leaders, it's so important that we are empathizing with and acknowledging the myriad of challenges our people are currently coping with, many of which, quite honestly, don't have an end in sight today. Psychologists describe this as ambiguous loss. They talk about it as losses that are unexplainable. Maybe they're outside of control and have no definitive endpoint. Sound familiar? Sounds like what we're experiencing right now. So the more we can express empathy, listen to what our team members, what associates are feeling, the more we are able to move the organization forward, continue to support associates where they're at, and deliver the results that we need to deliver. Which takes me to trust. Empathy is really a foundational element to building trust. And I think of trust as a fundamental aspect of any productive relationship. In business, trust has been proven to decrease things like turnover, it increases innovation, and quite honestly, just improves overall team performance. And when trust is compromised, relationships and productivity really can suffer. And as we navigate these new ways of working remotely, let's be honest, we're confronted with a fundamental question. How do we build and retain trust with our teams, our peers, and in many cases, even our customers? Now, I love this analogy. For those who may know me joining this call, know that I love sports. So I love this analogy. He said, building a company culture that assumes your team can't be trusted is like playing basketball with one hand tied behind your back. You might be able to do it, but you're never going to reach your full potential. The companies that empower their workers are going to win over companies who monitor them. The future of work is trust, not tracking. Several months ago, I mean, honestly, I was talking to various leaders, and one of them confided in me and said, well, I don't know how to trust people in this new environment. I'm used to seeing them. I can see what they're doing. How do I know that they're actually working if they're not in the office? This new environment, being successful in 2021, is going to require us to step back as leaders and figure out how do we build in levels of accountability and extend trust to our people. Which takes me to agility and resilience. Now, I think this has come up on several of the other sessions today as well. And it may seem obvious, but I do think of agility and resilience in two ways. One, I think of it as meaning speed over elegance. This is really about taking decisive action with courage based on what may be imperfect information, because we know that speed is essential in today's environment. We're changing at such a rapid pace. We have to be able to keep up with it and continue to adapt. And remember what I said on the previous screen, we need some level of certainty as human beings. So as leaders, we have to be able to make decisions to continue to offer a level of certainty to our team members. The second way that I think about agility and resilience is adapting to a new digital age. We have to be prepared as leaders to make this shift. And that may mean increasing our knowledge of this digital economy and building capabilities within our leadership pipeline. But we can't lose sight of the fact that this digital age is upon us and that the way we work and how we work is going to continue to evolve. So agility and resilience, again, continue to be an underpinning to our success as we move forward in 2021. And then last but not least, and really what I think kind of brings all of this together, is inclusion. It's this idea of inclusivity. Leaders and organizations shouldn't just embrace the idea of inclusion, they should be demanding it. Research is clear. Diverse teams perform better, period. And when leaders invest in diversity and inclusion, they are in a better position to create more adaptive, effective teams, and more likely to recognize diversity as a competitive advantage. So in summary, 2020 has been a challenging year. It's been a year like one we haven't experienced before. And while these may not necessarily be new or novel capabilities, I really do believe that as leaders, we have to go back to some of the basics. Focus on the skills and the capabilities that maybe got us ahead initially, and how we can leverage those capabilities to continue to evolve and take us into the next year. And I think of these, again, very simply as trust, empathy, agility and resilience, and inclusion. I very much appreciate the opportunity to join all of you today and share some of this perspective and share some of the experiences and the learnings that I've had and the learnings that I've received working with leaders around the globe in 2020. So with that, if we have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I know we've got a few minutes left, Suzanne, so.
Thanks so much for that presentation. That was really, really good stuff. The 4 pillars that you kind of outlined really do sum it up quite well. And I think for anybody, those give us 4 distinct lines of thought, kind of boxes to check on our organizations. It brought to mind one thing, with the trust factor in particular. I work with a lot of business owners and CEOs, and there's the stereotype of millennials and job hopping. And, this is oftentimes the argument for training and development. But, along your point about trust, I saw a statistic not long ago that 83% of millennials are more likely to stay at a job, even if they have better income opportunities elsewhere, if they feel that they can trust their organization and that they have a loyalty towards that organization. So I think that drives home your point about trust. What do you think about that specifically with the younger professionals and younger generation?
Yeah, I think it is true, Suzanne. And, while we may value or think about things differently based on, our generation or our age, at the end of the day, we all want to feel like people can just trust us. They've extended that I can be respected for who I am and what I do. That if I need to take a quick break during the day, I'm trusted. And I know that it's okay to do that. So it doesn't surprise me that that's the statistic. I would say that I think it probably extends to other generations as well. I think just like our millennial age, many others, they just want to feel trusted. They want to feel good about the company that they work with, the leader that they work with. And likewise, extend trust to them as well.
Yeah, really, really good points there. And, when you were talking, again, along trust, you were talking about empowering versus monitoring. So does that mean that in the corporate world in particular, is the micromanager dead?
I think so. But you know what? This is a hard, I'm going to call it a hard habit to unlearn. For so many years, we grow up and we learn from others around us. We saw what made them successful. And so it's not to say that it's terrible or it was bad to lead that way, but we're evolving. The way the world works, the way businesses work, it's different than it was 50 years ago, 75 years ago. And so it's hard, but we too, as the leaders, we just have to continue to evolve along with it. And so I challenge leaders when I hear that from them to say, what are other ways that you can hold people accountable? How do you know if they're getting their work done? Well, give them clear responsibilities, check in with them frequently. Have they hit milestones? there you go. You can find out if they're being productive and they're actually delivering what they need to, even if you don't see them.
Yeah, absolutely. We had one question come in about, is there any differences in remote work between cultures? In other words, are you customizing future leadership training around the relevant culture, or is there a difference between stability and certainty in your perspective?
It's an interesting question. Now, I certainly think that remote work between cultures and maybe even geographies looks and feels very different. Especially for some of my colleagues who are in Europe, spread out across countries, they've kind of been working in a remote environment for many years. And so in some ways, this isn't all that different. I think what's different is the ability to then physically meet, have central locations where we would bring large groups of individuals together for a capability building. So certainly, I think there are some differences based on the geography or maybe even the culture. Now, in terms of customizing future leadership training, I think in terms of, how I think about leadership, it's pretty stable in terms of regardless of where you are, there are some basics that are fundamental, but I think how those show up, maybe the behaviors underneath of them might look and feel differently. I use the example of trust. The way that someone in the US builds trust may look or feel slightly nuanced from the way their counterpart in Asia builds trust. And so I think we have to be mindful of some of those differences or those uniquenesses in how we are building those leadership capabilities for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of something. Matt Patterson was on our morning session, and they talk all the time about when you're changing learning for different cultures, you have to use different colors, different idioms. So it's kind of the same concept, is that we do have to adapt to the different cultures and what motivates them versus what disengages them. So I think you're basically saying the same thing with our leadership training too.
Right. Yeah. It's not always a simple step-by-step, here's how you develop or show empathy, or this is how you show trust and develop trust, right? It may look and feel different.
Yeah. Well, that was a really, really good presentation. And Amanda, I know that you work with folks around the world, and it's obvious that you have a pretty good handle on all of the different nuances that certainly go into leadership skills and leadership training. And so what we're going to do is we're going to move you over to our live after party room where folks can engage with you directly. And so for our audience, what that looks like is you will be, if you would like to join Amanda in her after party, here's the Zoom link. If you want to join that after party, you will have to exit the webinar, but you can come back afterwards. Zoom does not allow you to join more than one meeting at a time. So just exit the webinar, enter the Zoom meeting ID. There's no password required. And you can meet Amanda over in the live after party and ask her any specific questions that you have. And Amanda, thanks again for joining us. Great to have you. And folks can see you in the live after party. We'll see you over there. All right. So as Amanda leaves to get to her after party, we've got next up